Let me turn to John Sitilides. He's a global risk analyst for Trilogy Advisors. Sorry, I totally butchered your name and the company, and my apologies. John, are we going to have a deal by the end of the day based on what we heard from Jessica?
There's a very good possibility, Asieh, that we'll have a trade agreement in principle by the end of the day. That there'll be agreement on high-level areas, maybe within certain parameters, but just enough so that Canada is included with the U.S.-Mexico trade deal in order for the Congress to be able to approve it within 90 days. The clause, though, is that you don't have to have the full text ready for another 30 days, so they could continue negotiating for the entire month of September. But I think Canada needs very much to be part of this deal, and they will find every way to find that kind of language. That means they've got something in principle, even if they have 4 more weeks to hammer out details. And
do you agree with Jessica on her reporting that dairy issues, basically one of the big standing things that they can't seem to narrow the differences on?
It's a huge issue from the U.S. perspective. I think what the Trump administration is seeking is access to, I think it's 3.25% of the Canadian dairy market, as the Canadians agreed with the European Union in a separate trade deal, and then as part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the U.S. says, if you're giving them 3.25%, we'd like that same access ourselves to your dairy market.
John, what are the chances? I mean, we know President Trump does not like multilateral agreements. He's made it perfectly clear. He doesn't like TPP. He doesn't like Paris Climate Agreement. He didn't like the Iran nuclear agreement that involved all these other nations. He likes bilateral deals.
Yes.
Do you foresee a scenario that he's going to have a separate deal with Mexico and a different deal with Canada?
There's a possibility, Asieh, but I think it's very much the administration's interest to have a 3-way deal. It won't be NAFTA, the way the president already said that the deal that seems to have been struck with Mexico will not be called NAFTA because of the so-called negative connotations. But what we've seen in President Trump is his willingness to use maximum American leverage, whether it's political, military, or economic, with other countries on a bilateral basis. And Canada really needs this deal more than the United States. If there's not a NAFTA deal between the U.S. and Canada, bilateral or trilateral, there'll be a 2 to 2.5% impact on Canadian GDP. I mean, about 20% of Canadian exports come to the United States. It's very, very dependent on the U.S. market. If there isn't a deal for the U.S., 22/100ths of U.S. GDP is affected. So Trump is exercising maximum leverage here because he has the ability to do so.
What do you make about the report from the Toronto Star publishing off-the-record comments that President Trump made, certainly creating some drama here, telling reporters he would not give any ground to Canada in these talks? I'm sure this is not what Canadians really want to hear at this point.
It isn't, and I wonder, and again, this is just pure conjecture, how much of this is actually a deliberate negotiating style? I mean, does President Trump, with all that he's been through over the last 1.5 or 2.5 years, really trust reporters to keep something off the record? Did he intend for this to leak?
Interesting.
Basically put the Canadians in a position where they have to stand up on critical issues and then ultimately make concessions that give Trudeau and the foreign minister a face-saving way out of this process? I don't know. I don't put it past him. But I have to believe he knew that any comments he would make to reporters would eventually be gone public.
And, you know, NAFTA is supposed to be an agreement with Canada, U.S., and Mexico. As far as Mexico is concerned, as far as the U.S. Congress is concerned, would they even want a revamped trade agreement that was called NAFTA before without Canada in it?
That's going to be a very interesting question going forward. I don't really have a crystal ball into how we distinguish between the Mexican participation and the Canadian, but I think overall Trump's base will be very, very happy, and they'll trust him to have cut a better deal than what was problematic with NAFTA in the past. And if there are important benefits for Democratic constituencies, you could see bipartisan support for this after the congressional elections.
All right. Thank you so much, John Sitilides. I had to make sure I say your name right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.